now that you have your design drawn out on your board, you should have that completed before you do this step. So next you are going to actually be able to create your sand painting using glue and sand. So to keep it traditional, the traditional Navajo designs would use subtle earth tones, colors that you would find like white, like limestone, and they would use grays, black, and turquoise. So there's black, there's white, there's gray. I have some turquoise here. And then also some yellows and red like sandstone, and some browns as well. And your designs can be with all those different colors, but you want to make sure that your background is going to be a nice sand color, because remember, these designs would traditionally be created on the ground, on the sand, on the dirt. So it's important that the background stays a solid, calm earth tone like that brown color like the dirt would be. So traditionally we're going to leave that for the background, and then the rest of the space we can decide what colors we're going to use. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to start by creating the design of the Hohokam flute player, and I decided that I want him to be a joyous turquoise color. So what you're going to need before you start is you're going to need some glue, and I just have it in a container like this instead of the squeeze bottle, because you are actually going to paint the glue onto different parts of your project to create the designs. So I am going to start with some glue on my brush, and I'm going to paint it for the section I want to be a certain color. So if I'm only going to paint the body turquoise, if I only want the body turquoise, I'm not going to paint anything except the part I want turquoise. And then later I'll paint all the stuff I want brown, and then I'll paint all the stuff I want white. You only want to do one color at a time. So I'm going to start by painting the body turquoise. So I'm going to carefully paint the body in, because I want the body to be this first color I'm using, the turquoise color. So I'm going to paint that whole thing. And you have to be careful, because if you paint it too slowly or you paint too much, the glue is going to dry before you put the sand on. So you want to work kind of quickly but slow enough that you can stay inside your design. And if you think that the area is too big to paint all at once, you can paint a section like this, put some sand on, and then paint the next section. So I'm going to hold my design over top of the sand color that I'm using, and I'm going to just take a pinch of sand and sprinkle it on top of my design where I just put the glue. So I'm just going to sprinkle that on there. I'm making sure I cover every spot that I had with glue, and then I'm going to very carefully just tip it sideways and tap it back into where I had it. So you can see I have that design in there, and you can see right now you can still see that black line through there, and I can decide later if I can see too much of it, I can go back over it a second time to make it go through, cover up those black lines. But if not, it might cover it up a little more when it dries. So we'll see how that turns out, but I'm going to continue going with the rest of it for now. So I'm just carefully painting with the brush, and I don't want like big bumps. If you notice there's big bumps of glue there, I'm going to smooth it out. You just need enough glue on there to make the sand hold in place. It doesn't take a lot. It's pretty fine sand. There's not a lot of weight to it. So you can paint in the parts that you need. Make sure that every spot that you want turquoise, or whatever color you're using, is covered with glue, and then I'm going to do the same process again. So when I pick it up, I sprinkle the glue or the sand onto the glue. I'm making sure that I'm holding it over top of my sand bucket so that it's not going to go all over the floor. I'm making sure I get everywhere. And then I'm going to tip it on its side. Everywhere that there's glue, I tap, tap, tap. And I have my next section done in turquoise. So then I can keep going with the turquoise. I'm going to do this little line for his neck next and his head. And again, I'm going to smooth it out. There's like a big bump there. I'm going to smooth it out so that there's not quite so much glue in one spot. And I'm going to do his arms while I'm at it, because the head was a pretty small area, so I think I have enough time to do this arm before it dries, before my glue dries. Being careful to only get the glue where I want the design. If I get it anywhere else, it's going to make that part have the sand on it too, and I want to make sure it's just where I want my design. And then I repeat the process. I sprinkle the sand on just wherever I have the glue. Make sure it's covering all of the fresh glue that I laid, and then I tap it back off again. And if you need different size brushes, you can use, some of them have a finer point, some of them have a thicker end to them, so you can decide which one you need. If you need the fine point for little areas and the thicker end to get some of the areas that have big open spaces, like to fill in the background and stuff like that. So pay attention to which brush you're using as well. I'm going to do that arm, and I'm going to do the hair. And the hair I have to be careful because it's a little thinner than the rest, so I have to make sure I'm really paying attention to where my brush is going and that it's only getting glue where the hair is, so that I'm not creating designs where I don't want them. I'm not going to get the blue sand, the turquoise sand, in spots where it's not supposed to be. So I think after I finish this strand of hair, I'm going to put some sand on, because I want to make sure that I get it on there before it starts to dry. I think down here it's starting to dry up a little because I can see it's clearer than it was. The glue turns clear when it dries. So now I'm going to sprinkle the sand on the spots. Notice I'm not putting a ton of sand on, I'm just getting enough to make sure that it covers the glue. So I don't need a whole bunch, just enough that it covers the glue. And I'm keeping it over top of that sand thing that's the same color, so that I make sure that all my extra sand goes back in that bucket. And then I can continue on. I'm going to do the next strand of hair, being very careful to only get it where I want the design to be. And then you can just continue on. So you can leave the video going if you want to see how I continue doing the rest of it, or you can go ahead and get started on your own sand painting. Imagine how different this would be if you were creating it the way that they traditionally painted these sand paintings. They just used their hands. They didn't have any glue or anything. They just used their hands to create the design, and when they were all done, it was just washed away. It was blown away in the wind. Imagine all that work, and then it's blown away in the wind. To think about why would they do that? Why was it important for it to just be there for a little while and then be gone? I wanted to make sure that no one desecrated it. It was considered a very important area, and they didn't want anyone to ruin it by walking on it or something that would be disrespectful towards it. So they blew it away in order to avoid that. And now I'm going to create the legs on here. The glue and
the spots where I want the design to be. Spots where I want that turquoise sand.
you can see, even though I'm being very careful and trying to only get it back in that bucket, there is some paint that is getting on my desk and stuff. So when you're done, you're going to have to make sure that you sweep that all up and take care of it properly so it doesn't leave a bunch of sand for the next person. So there I have the whole person in turquoise. And some of these parts are already starting to dry, and I don't like how I can see through that so much, so I'm actually going to add a second layer of turquoise over top of that. So I'm just going to put some more sand or some more glue on there. Paint back over it. I'm being very careful. I don't want to press very hard, because if you press hard, it's going to scrape off that other design you already created. I'm just going to right over top of that design, just very gently with the glue. Just very gently, careful I'm not dripping the glue anywhere. And then I'm going to sprinkle some more sand on there and see if having that second layer makes it so that we can't see that permanent marker underneath. Ah, see, that's much better. Now you can see just the sand color there. So I'm going to go over and do a second layer over all of that. Being careful I don't drip the glue. I've got some hanging off there. I want to make sure I don't drip it. I'm going to tap it on the side, make sure it doesn't drip onto my design. Go over the whole thing as
line underneath. And I'm going to do all the parts that I want turquoise. I'm going to complete all of those before I move to a different color. So if I want these arrows or this design, if I want any of that part to be turquoise, I need to do all of the turquoise stuff before I switch to a new color. It'll help keep the sand from mixing, and also on your actual sand painting, it'll keep the sand from accidentally mixing with a different color on there as well. So I'm going to finish the second layer of this. I'm being very careful so that I can get all that back into that same bucket that I took it out of, not getting too much extra. I'm going to tip it this way so that it goes back in there. My design's really starting to turn out the way I like it. And notice right here there's a little black area. I'm going to put just a little bit there. And then I'm going to keep going over top of everything a second time, giving it a second coat so that the design that I drew doesn't show through. I only want the actual
to show my design. Again, I'm being careful not to press too hard with my brush. I don't want to tear off any of the sand I already put down on there. Alright, I better put some sand on here before my glue starts to dry. I'm going to sprinkle some on here. Make sure I'm getting it everywhere that I put fresh glue on. Just taking little pinches at a time, making sure I really get it covering those new spots of glue. Tap that side off and then do the legs that I put on there. Alright, so you can see I have the whole Hohokam flute player design completed on there. Now I'm going to use a second color now. I'm going to start doing some of the background color just to show you how you're going to go about adding a second color where they touch. So you're just going to use the glue and do the exact same thing you did for the turquoise and just go right up along the edge, being careful not to accidentally scrape off any of the design you already created. So I can go carefully along the edge of that. And I'm going to paint it in. Again, carefully, so I'm only getting the glue in the area that I want this new color to stick. Be very careful around the edges. Make sure you don't get any new or any of the old glue sticking to it or anything like that. So I've got that drawn on there with glue, painted on there. And then I'm going to take my next color, and I'm going to take my old one and put the lid on it so I don't accidentally mix the colors at all, even by accident. I don't want to spill it or anything like that, so put the lid on there. Take my new color and do this same process. So I'm going to sprinkle it on there, being careful to get it everywhere that I put the glue. And if you can avoid getting it on the other color, that's always best, because you don't want it to accidentally get some in there in spots that had a little glue showing. But it's going to get on there some. You can see how some of it has, some of the brown is over the turquoise right now. But hopefully, if you were careful with the glue and where you painted it, when I tap it off, it should come off of the turquoise for the most part and stay in the brown area. If you get a little bit in the other color areas, don't wipe it unless you're positive that the first color you put down is already dry, because if you start to wipe it with your finger, if you accidentally press too hard, it's going to peel that off. that color you initially had, and it could ruin your design. So I am going to continue adding my colors, doing the same process until the entire board is covered. Even the background is going to be covered in this brown color. So I'll probably have to do 2 coats of sand over the entire thing, just like I did with the turquoise. So I will paint the design on, sprinkle the sand on, and then paint the design on a second time with the glue and sprinkle the sand on a second time. So you continue to work on your artwork, and I will continue to work on this one.